Okay, hi everyone. If you're listening to this presentation or watching it, you're probably here for Ted's presentation. He's going to be presenting on scalable equilibrium computation and multi-agent influential games on networks. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the presentation and feel free to reach out with any questions.
All right, Willow, you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Science Friday. Science Friday is an initiative of Journal Club, which is a student organization with faculty members who train new people to present scientific journals and, most importantly, provide a forum for database discussion. We take on almost any relevant issue that you're passionate about. If you want to be trained as a presenter, or if you're a veteran presenter looking for a venue, please email Anya and we will work with you to make that happen. I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone on the Journal Club exec team. Today it is Caroline for helping out with the Zoom on short notice. The team is mentored by Dr. Paul Hauser and Luke D. There are 3 layers. Aksha handles the training of people on our team, Anya handles the training of presenters, and I curate our talks and handle Science Thursday itself. This is how our meeting today is going to run. Today Ted is going to present for about 20 minutes. There will be time for questions mid-presentation. Please type your questions into the chat as you have them. The simpler the questions, the better. We will organize them, either call on you or ask the question for you if you prefer. We are recording this presentation for Zoom, so if you would not like your name to appear in the recording, please only private message your questions to D. Yes. During the presentation, we ask that you turn your cameras on and stay muted unless you're asked to clarify a question. Before we begin, the presentation for next week is Matthew Oakland, and I hope to see you there. But now please give it up for Ted.
Woo, Ted!
Thank you, guys. I was just reminding Luke, I believe I was the first presenter to go remote last year when restrictions came into place, and now I guess I'm the first one to try out our new in-person version. So I'm very happy to do that. I'm also very happy to be talking about this research. It's very close to my heart. It's a fabulous collaboration between some unlikely collaborators, I think. That's the reason why I chose it. It's a group of political scientists who got together with some engineers and computer scientists to do some really cool modeling. As you know if you've taken my classes or if you were there last year when I spoke, I'm very interested in network based models, agent-based models on networks for social dynamics of various kinds. This is a fabulous example. It's also a great example of science in the making. This literally was presented in February at a professional conference, and it presents some quite new and very exciting results. So without further ado, and there is a link, this obviously my presentation is all available to you at the end. I'll give you the link to it. So, and there's a link here to the paper itself. But go on. Right, so we're talking about influence graphs. So influence graphs are directed weighted networks, and I will show them to you as colored networks, the color representing part of the dynamic here. That, in other words, it will be changing. The nodes are the opinion holders. Think of people as voters, for example, or people that will act perhaps in some capacity or other. The colors represent influencer agents. So there's a sort of a hidden layer to this, where there are some other players, not the nodes, who are trying to influence the opinions of the nodes. Think of them, for example, as political parties or something of that nature, right? And I will represent those as colors. And then each node will have a slightly different blend of color, if you will, right? To represent both. So in fact, each node will have both an internal belief in terms of which, combination of colors, if you will, of, what do they believe in, and then they have external beliefs, the beliefs that are shown, that they show by the way that they act. All right, so what we see in the color is their external belief. We don't directly see their internal beliefs. Their external beliefs are, so it's colored. Let me just go through these. Yeah, and there's blending. So the blending is the balance between in their external beliefs, the balance between the different influencers. And as we'll see in a minute, the vertex colors change because they also listen to what their neighbors tell them in the network.
Ted, could you just for a second, would you mind just pointing to a node?
Right. So, for example, this node right here.
Okay.
Can you see? Yeah.
So that symbolizes a person.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. It could also be groups of people, so this could be applied to different settings, but let's just say in the simplest case, it's a person, yeah.
And then could you show me the lines that are coming out of that person and what they mean?
Right, so this is just a visual that I downloaded from the internet. This is not from the actual model. I will show you one that applies more directly to the model. The lines in our model are directed, right? Whereas here, these are not direct. So in other words, they would have direction. And the lines moving so in the actual model, the lines, the arrows pointing into this node will describe the influence that neighboring nodes will have to you. So you're going to change the ways you behave, your external beliefs, if you will, your color, to some degree represent also what you're hearing from your neighbors. And you will see that. So the color will be shifting over time in the dynamic.
So as the lines to a certain node change, the color of the node may change.
Exactly. Yeah, indeed. So this is in fact the formula, the main formula for the update. Z is as I will say, is the expressed belief or the external, belief. And in this case, so Z is that variable, right? In this case, it's the old, and you can see that because it's t-1, t would be the new one. So the previous period, expressed belief of neighbor J in agent K. So J represents the node on the network. K represents the influencer, the agent who's trying to influence them. As opposed to this one, which is the new expressed belief in agent K of you, the node I that we're focusing on. So I'm trying, this equation is trying to tell us how you update the color for node I, right? And the color for node I will be a blend of these numbers Z, depending on each K. K is the influencer, right? The agent that is trying to influence you. So in our example that I'll show you in a minute, there will be 3 influencers, red, green, and blue, right? In standard RGB code, right? So you'll have a certain amount of redness in you, a certain amount of greenness, and a certain amount of blueness in you. And that will change over time. So this would be a time t, how much you have, right? And as I said before, it will partly depend on what the, again, RGB blend at the previous time step was of your neighbor J. What else will play a role here? Well, the weights. These are the weights along the edges. This is the weight along the edge JI. This is, in other words, an arc that moves towards you, from neighbor J. And it has a certain amount of weight. How much do you trust it, essentially? Think of it that way. And that weight appears in the denominator too. The denominator acts as a balance, basically it's the total influence of all the neighbors. So you're essentially balancing how much the particular neighbor is telling you compared to all the other neighbors, what the total that you're receiving from everyone. Finally, in this formula is this SIK, which is basically your internal belief that's not visible to anyone. It's what your internal bias was. How much did you like agent K to begin with, right? So that's, to begin with, not under anybody's control. It's just an attribute of each node. Each node has some a priori, given preference for each of the agents, each of the influences.
Okay, so Ted, if I were to simplify this whole equation, it would essentially be my predicted belief would be contingent upon my internal belief, the belief of people around me, their ability to influence me, and the total amount of influence that I'm experiencing at any given time.
That's perfect. Yes, indeed.
Cool.
Now, we're closing the loop by allowing the influencers, the agents that are not visible in the game here, to be investing in changing your opinions. All right. So in other words, what we previously took to be your endowment of opinions, that were exogenous, we're now endogenizing by saying, Agent K, so here's your prior belief, to begin with in Agent K, SIK, right? But, and this is the updated one, but here, this is it. Agent K can invest B dollars to node I to try to advertise basically for themselves, right? To say, you should like me, right? So that increases, so BIK increases how much you like them, basically, right? Of course, it's normalized again by the total amount of investment to node I that come from all the agents. L is the generic agent. So all the agents are trying to, like, for example, think of airtime for political ads, right? All of them are trying to convince you to change your prior, willingness to vote for them. And so they're incented to invest money to change various nodes' minds. The whole point, and I'm getting that in a second, I'd like to show you mathematically how it is, but the whole point is a trade-off, because obviously these influencers, these agents have limited budget. They want to try directly to influence the prior beliefs of some key players in the network, because they then will influence their neighbors. So rather than just spending broadly for everyone, find the best way to allocate your limited resources, advertising resources, influence resources, to change people's minds that are critical in the network, that play sort of, pivotal, nodal roles, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so guys, just a quick note, the gentleman Aiden, who's responding in the chat, is actually one of the authors of this paper, so he's
exactly
not some random person who just knows.
Welcome, Aiden. So I will say something more about, as I just want to go through the basics of the model, but I will introduce Aiden and say a little bit more about the collaboration as well.
Wes, did you want to ask your question out loud? The chat's not going to be in the video, just so you know.
I'm happy to, although my question has been answered.
Let's do it.
Want me to ask for posterity?
Yes.
Great. Ted, can you give an example as to what the different colors might represent in terms of beliefs? The crux of my question is, are the different colors different sets of beliefs, or are they different interpretations, or the different views on the same belief, right? So if I have red, green, and blue, is red like donuts are good and blue is donuts are bad and green is donuts are fattening, or is red like donuts are good and blue is like I like puppies?
It could be either, as far as I'm concerned, although I'm sure Aiden might have some perspective on this as well. But I would like to keep it at this point as general as possible, in the sense that think of a multi-dimensional space of opinions, let me just step back and say a lot of the value added of this paper was the fact that they managed to do what they did in a multi-agent setting. Essentially, the two-agent setting was, kind of understood to be solvable in this way, but it's the fact that multiple agents can act, so more than two. So unlike a situation like the American political system, where you would have, Republicans and Democrats, and you just have, to say how much you like in a one-dimensional continuum. This is interesting because it's a multi-dimensional continuum. So, the three players could be form a simplex, essentially, or you could have more than three. I'm showing three just for simplicity of the color scheme, but they could be K in general agents. So in some sort of higher dimensional simplex, if you will, where they each span their own dimension. So they could each represent some different combination of attributes. And you, as the voter or whatever, likes some more than others, but you like some sort of mixture or blend of them. Does that make sense? Okay.
We're going to assume that Wes knows what you're talking about. Go on, Ted.
All right. So I won't belabor this, but basically it's an optimization problem, which is what I described before in words. F sub K is what the kth agent wants to maximize. For example, they want people to vote for them, right? The easiest thing would be like the total number of, contributions of their color in the network, right? Something like that. It's a function. The important thing is that it's a function of the asymptotic. Look at the infinity there, right? Of the long-term beliefs, because the beliefs will be changing over time. As I'm going to thing, you'll see that they'll be changing because they get influences from each other and so on. but they're willing to wait. In this modeling paradigm, you're willing to wait for it to settle down. And then you're going to evaluate what your influence is in the long run like that. And you have the constraints, like obviously you can invest positive money and have to be less than your budget. Right, so, okay, I guess I said that. All right. So their main theorem, and again, I'll do this fairly quickly, but is basically that under certain assumptions, and they are to some degree restrictive, but they're not unreasonable, they can get a lot of results out. So when these functions, the payoff functions, are non-decreasing and convex, and when the game is what's called constant sum, in other words, that the sum of the FKs is 1, or it's a constant number, you can normalize it to 1, then there exists a pure Nash equilibrium. And you guys that have done some game theory, you know what this means, right? So there exists a Nash equilibrium and it's pure. So it doesn't involve any randomization. So each player has there's an optimum that cannot be unilaterally improved. And also, moreover, this optimum is unique even. If additionally, the FKs are continuous and strictly increasing. So not just non-decreasing, but strictly increasing. And if the internal beliefs are non-zero for every agent. So every agent has, every node likes even a little bit all the agents. They're not completely discount any agent. So these are technical, as you can tell. These are to enable the proof to go through. They're not the strictest possible ones. It is likely that they can be slightly improved with more elaboration. But there are also cases for which we might be interested in. For example, concave payoff functions come to mind, which matter in economic settings where this technique might not actually be able to be extended. Anyway, under some assumptions, we get a strong result of pure Nash equilibria and unique Nash equilibria. That makes it a very easy problem to solve computationally. There are very efficient ways to solve them. Essentially, you change the original optimization problem to what's called a convex optimization problem, for which, and I won't belabor this, it's a dual problem basically, for which there exist very fast interior point algorithms for solving it. So without doing that, I want to show you how the model runs. I want to show you a very simple implementation that I have of the model, just to kind of.
Can we get a super quick recap on what the Nash equilibrium is?
Right. So the Nash equilibrium is a set of strategies. So for all the agents, that all the agents get to have one, such that no agent unilaterally has an incentive to change that strategy. In other words, if they did, they would lose out compared to what they would have had if they stuck with it. And that's not always the case. There are many games, especially multiplayer games, where if you can go around in cycles and keep changing your behavior, and everybody like chasing your tail. Essentially, this is a property of many games, especially multiplayer games. The question of constructability, practical constructability, which is what this paper is about, of the Nash equilibrium, is very important. So Nash, back in the 50s, proved. And it was a differential topology proof, so it was rather an abstract proof of existence, not constructive. It was like a fixed point theorem, right? That the games, a certain class of games, has Nash equilibria. Whether those Nash equilibria could be efficiently constructed was a big open problem, for which another of the collaborators of this paper, Kostis, actually won an award. Well, he did his PhD thesis and with his supervisor ultimately won an award for proving that in fact two-player games, the Nash equilibria can be efficiently constructed fairly recently, just like 9 years ago. So this field so it was an open problem, the Nash problem, this problem of computability of Nash equilibria, right? In general, for specific games, of course, that was done. Many games have been solved completely, but in general, to be able to do that. So for multiplayer games, it's still an open problem. So this is a class of multiplayer games for which now they're proving that essentially the same can be done, at least with these assumptions on the payoff functions. Does that make sense? Okay. I just want to, so this is just an example of the kind of graph that you could see. Oops. don't need to do that. It's still okay? It's still good?
You're good.
Yeah. You see the colors, the blend of colors, obviously. You see numbers. The numbers, the first, in each case, next to each node, there's supposed to be a set of 3 numbers. First number is the redness, then the greenness, and then the blueness. Okay. And this particular one has 15 nodes and 116 edges. It's a random directed graph. I want to show you a smaller one, this one, with just 5 edges, and let's see if this will run. I have a little video animation here of the MATLAB code running. So notice how so that was the setup, the initialization. Notice now how the numbers are changing. Do you see how the numbers are changing and the colors are shifting simultaneously? They're sort of blending more. In a moment when it's done, we see actually, hold on, let me just stop that and go back for a second to show you that graph. Okay, so this graph shows for each node, 1 through 5, I didn't label it, I should have, the evolution of the amount of blueness, redness, and greenness in it, right? Okay, and if we continue, right, so that was, until now, that simulation was with fixed internal beliefs. So the SIs were randomly given, but fixed. Now we are allowing some random amount of investment by the 3 agents, right? So things have changed, and I'll explain these numbers in a second, because the last bit, yeah, so now it's done, the last graph. Okay, so let me describe these numbers here. The leftmost number is the total benefit. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Hold on, I'll just jump to the end here and freeze it here. Okay, so the leftmost numbers, these 1.3473, etc., and underneath it, those are the benefit that the red agent got. The middle ones are the benefit of the green agent, and the last ones, the rightmost ones, are the benefit of the blue agent. In the first row, it was if the internal beliefs were random but fixed of the five players, of the 5 voters, right? The middle one was where they were the agents were investing randomly with no optimization, to those players. And the bottom one was with an optimization along the lines of the optimization that they talk about in the paper. Notice how in the end they get equally balanced almost, right? And I think we only had 100 steps or something like that, not even, 50 steps, you can see here, right? And they settle down very quickly and they're almost balanced. The important thing is they're almost balanced, 1.6 something in each case. The reason is because their budgets were equal. They each had equal budgets, right? But if I go now to back to the, how can I go back to my presentation? There we go. And now I'll go to the next slide. Right, so these are the summaries of what I just talked about, and the budget was balanced. They each had balanced budget, and the graph was fully connected. But if I go to this situation, and I'll jump all the way to the end, so you can see the same place at the end where we were. Oops. Yep, there we go. Sorry. Yeah. And if you can make it bigger so you can see it better. So in this case, they converge, but they're not balanced. The middle one is more than twice as much as the other ones, and the other ones are equal, and that's because the budget was 10, 50, 10. So you see how at the beginning when they were random, it wasn't like, you couldn't tell, right? But obviously the middle guy, the green guy in this case, was able to take advantage of optimization, influence more specifically, and use the fact that they had a much bigger budget and outwin the others, outplay the others, out-influence the others, let's put it that way. And so, and that's the idea. And then of course, I won't bother showing you that, but there's the next, so here's the summary of these results. And then, so the 10, 50, 10, the next example has another unbalanced graph, but also an incomplete graph in this case. So some of the nodes are more influential than others. So the optimization is a little bit harder, but still it converges fairly quickly. And again, converges to, in this case, the red one having the bigger budget, taking advantage of it. And the other two almost the same, converging a little slower because the graph is not fully connected. So there's some bottlenecks, in the influence, but it still converges. These are very fast. Of course, I'm showing very small graphs. I mean, the advantage of their algorithm is they can be done in huge graphs, thousands of nodes. But I think you get the idea of what's going on here. I want to end, before I tell you a little bit about the collaboration, I want to end by pointing out how I was struck, and I've been in the field in science for decades, right? And I've read lots of papers. I was struck with how explicit they were. They had essentially a whole page at the end of an explicit call to the ethical implications of their work. Go through, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that they say, right? Here, they say, our work could potentially lead to a greater ability for an agent to push a particular message, greater ability for an agent to defend against that same message. Later on, they say, the potential to create positive impacts by helping agents identify advertising strategies that propagate accurate information and good behavioral influences as far as possible, given limited budgets. Of course, information about optimal advertising distribution could also help those interested in spreading bad behavioral influences, right? And if the weaker agent in some hypothetical competition uses our model and the stronger agent does not, our work has the effect of reducing power disparities. But if the stronger agent uses the model, our work has the effect of amplifying power disparities. And at the end, the steps we have taken to make our work accessible and implementable for agents with relatively lower resources, because of the fact that this work could be abused, and they make their code available and implementable easily without significant computing resources, not prohibitive anyway. So I was quite struck by that, and I applaud that. Finally, anyway, in terms of the presentation, you can get everything from the QR code and the tiny URL. They point you to the Google folder where all the information is, the MATLAB code as well. I just want to say a word in introducing, I guess, Aidan as well, but this is very close to my heart, this work, this collaboration. I myself studied political science many years ago at MIT, and at the time I was mostly interested in quantitative topics, and no one really, this is late 80s, early 90s, I was coming up with some crazy models, like I guess what would now be called agent-based models, and no one knew anything about them at the time, in the Sloan School in political science anyway. And I also, thereabouts, as soon as I graduated, I started working at LIDS, at a lab in engineering in the, it was what used to be the Servo Mechanisms Lab, which famously flew Apollo to the moon. But nevertheless, at the time, it was called LIDS. And since then, over the decades, it's given rise to a larger institute, the IDSS initiative for data systems and society, that under which the work that was done, in this paper is housed, and so I'm fascinated that this is happening now, maybe 30 years after my time, but nevertheless, it is happening, and you get political scientists like Aidan working with engineers and computer scientists like Kostis and Eric Demain and the folks at LIDS, trying to apply quantitative methods for distributed control theory and systems identification and all of that stuff to problems of the management of the social sphere. I can't wait to see where they will take it next. So with that, welcome, Aidan, and thank you guys, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or maybe Aidan can take it away now.
Woo! More. Thanks, guys. And for those of you who want to stick around, we usually geek out a little bit at this point, so you can ask questions for clarification, or you can kind of dig deeper into this conversation with Ted and maybe Aidan, who's in the background. But thank you guys all for joining us today. Next week is going to be Matthew Oakland, who's going to be looking at environment, specifically temperature change and socioeconomic diversity. The idea that the climate that people live in, or sorry, not next week, Andrew, for the week after, specifically the literal climate of people in different